Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. I'm very excited about today's episode. My name is Kathy Mazak. If you're new here, I talk about ways to design your career so that you can get your writing and publishing done. And often this looks like putting writing and publishing at the center of your career. If you're excited about that idea and you would like to hear more, then go ahead to scholarsvoice.org and sign up for our In the Pipeline newsletter. We send a weekly newsletter on Mondays with writing tips, publishing tips. Yeah, just good stuff. My reading recommendations, all about writing and publishing in academia. So today I am starting a series that I'm very excited about called The Real Stages of the Academic Career. So last week, we re-released my original episode about this, and now I am doing a deep dive into each of the stages, starting with the first stage. And I'm going to be talking about writing at each stage, about your relationship with mentors and students, your relationship to your research, your time management strategies that you might be using, so many things. And I've already started this podcast episode and restarted it many times. And what I realized was in my original plans, I was going to talk about 7 different aspects of the career for each of like the 5 stages that I came up with. And actually, it's just too much. So I'm going to select what I think are the most salient kind of aspects of the career to talk about for each of the real stages of the academic career. So today's episode is all about the apprenticeship or learning stage of the career. I'm going to just give you kind of the 2-minute version of what I mean by the real stages of the academic career. So we are I call them received stages. So basically there's these kind of ideas. Sometimes we divide the stages into like early career, mid-career, late career, which generally maps to in the US and Canadian tenure system, like pre-tenure, post-tenure, full. But I've found that by coaching many academics in many different stages of their careers, I've found that those labels, those received stages like early, mid, late career are not as useful as you would think in terms of helping you to figure out whether you're on track for your particular career stage, or kind of just like figuring out what is important at this career stage to learn and develop. So that's why I am introducing this concept of the real stages of the academic career. I'll tell you what they are. And then today we are digging into the apprenticeship/learning stage, which is the first stage. So according to me, the real stages of the academic career are learning an apprenticeship, then stepping into your own or coming out from under the wing of your advisor, then planting your flag, then building your legacy, and then enjoying your legacy. And these stages can and do overlap. So you might be in a transition between stages and you will hear me talk about it and both of the stages will sound relevant to you. That means you're probably transitioning from one stage to the other. These stages don't map perfectly to, as I was mentioning before, like the promotion levels. I actually think that that is something that trips people up when they think that the promotion, like getting a promotion, or like if you're a student or a postdoc, like moving from student to postdoc, moving from postdoc to tenure-track job or full-time researcher job, getting promoted, like those external reflections of your career stage, the mistake is that people think that's actually going to change their careers, when the only thing that changes your career is you. So that's what we're talking about today. All right, so let's dig in to the learning apprenticeship stage, which is our focus for today. So here's what I mean by learning apprenticeship. This is the stage when you first enter the scholarly life, the academic career trajectory. For most of us, it looks like the very beginning of this stage would be when you start to study in a doctoral program. But it can last, and I would say that this does last throughout your postdoc period as well. So I really think that learning apprenticeship, this stage is any stage where you have an advisor and you're kind of beholden to an advisor. So during this stage, what's happening is that you are getting to know your field. You are training in research and writing, and you are being acculturated into the culture of academia. And specifically, like the culture of academia writ large, but also the specific culture around your field. And what I mean by culture, or being acculturated into, this particular, what I mean by culture here is like you're getting to learn what are the values, what do people value in your field in terms of writing, ideas, how you act, how you interact with others, right? And so you're really learning a new way of being, a way of seeing the world. And that's why I call it the learning/apprenticeship stage, because it's both kind of like very generally learning, but then also the apprenticeship part, right, is that through your relationship with your advisor or advisors, you're usually like being apprenticed into new ways of doing research or ways of doing research because you've never done them before. You're being apprenticed into the actual job of being a professor. And I actually think that apprenticeship is a better model, although it's still not a perfect one because there's a lot of kind of hidden stuff in this, like learning to be a professor or learning to be an academic. But it's better than being taught because there isn't a lot of explicit teaching around some of these things. So sometimes writing isn't explicitly taught. It's more of an apprenticeship model. You learn on the job. Okay. So that's what I'm talking about with learning and apprenticeship. And that's why I think it's kind of a better fit than just calling you a student or whatever. It's any work that you do under an advisor. And so I'm going to talk about some specific parts of your career. And the model I'm going to use for my conversation, or the structure I'm going to use for this conversation, is what you're thinking about versus where your energy and effort would be more usefully placed. Okay. So I'm trying to avoid the word should, although I'm sure it will come out of my mouth during this podcast and the future episodes about the different career stages. But the reason I try to avoid should is just, I'm always telling people to avoid the shoulds. So I feel like I'm contradicting myself. But I guess what I'm trying to do is reflect to you like what I see people doing versus what I wish people were doing, that I know by having worked with so many academics across career stages, what I know would be a better kind of use of their time. Okay. So of course, we're going to start with writing practice. All right. So what you're worried about or what you're thinking about while you're writing as in this apprenticeship stage, sometimes you're thinking about like looking smart, sounding good. You're definitely thinking about like you have to do a lot more writing, usually longer writing while you're doing your classwork for your doctoral degree. You're probably thinking, and rightfully so, about writing your dissertation. And you might be thinking about publishing something, like getting some kind of peer-reviewed paper out so that when you go on the job market or when you go to get a postdoc, you have some kind of publications or a publication out there. Where I would love to see more people in the apprenticeship stage putting their energy and effort would be in systematically observing the genre that they are expected to write in for the rest of their career. So if you're most all academic fields you will need to publish peer-reviewed papers. Some fields you will also need to write books. What does a peer-reviewed paper look like in your field? The most impactful exercises I ever did in my doctoral program was during an advanced qualitative research course with Ann Haas-Dyson. She's a early literacy scholar. She had everybody pick a dissertation from a set of dissertations and read it and reverse outline it. And then that outline really helped me see how I could structure my dissertation. So that reverse outline technique is something that you can apply to peer-reviewed papers right now. So as someone who is in the apprenticeship stage, you're probably reading a lot. So as you're reading, also observing structure, discourse, how arguments are made. Like, what is the format that people use for peer-reviewed papers in your field? So really becoming a scholar of genre is very, very important. And many people leave that for when they're trying to write their own peer-reviewed papers. No, while you're reading a bunch of stuff, start systematically observing how papers are put together, how discourse is developed, how arguments are developed. That would be a really valuable thing for you to do. Another part of your writing practice that's really important that you might not be thinking about too much during your apprenticeship stage is getting feedback and learning from right now in this early stage of your career, learning to distinguish between feedback that is mean or just cruel or posturing and feedback that is negative but constructive. So I hope your professors are giving you constructive feedback. It's not worded cruelly, it's not a personal attack on you. And you can kind of start to learn how to distinguish between those things, because negative feedback that is constructive is really, really important and can really help you learn so much. And actually, I think a lot of times as students, we think if we don't get feedback, then we did good, right? Like that's kind of like a message I think we get like in high school, maybe in undergrad. Like if the professor doesn't have too much to say, you must have, A+. I don't have any feedback. I don't have any criticism. That's not what you want at this stage of your career. When you are in the apprenticeship stage, you want as much feedback and as often on your writing as possible. And then you want to develop that distinguishing between like, okay, this feedback was just cruel or mean, which hopefully you're not getting, but you certainly could be. And this feedback is useful. This feedback will help me develop my mastery of the genre or my mastery of writing in my field. Because the most important thing in this apprenticeship stage is reps. And what I mean by that is repetition, right? You write, you get feedback, you write, you get feedback. More reps means faster growth. It means faster improvement in your writing. All right. So I want to talk a little bit too about your relationship with mentors at this stage of your career. I guess like one thing I want to say to start is that if you have a toxic relationship with your mentor, your advisor, the sooner you get out of that relationship, the better. So exploring ways, not feeling like you have to stay in toxic relationships, but knowing that you can find, or you should start to investigate ways that you can get out of a toxic relationship with your advisor. The reason I say this is because I see these toxic relationships with advisors reverberate throughout the academic career and just lead to problems later with confidence, and really actually leads to writing problems later. So you really want to try to pair yourself with somebody who gives constructive feedback, who is a good mentor. They might be tough. They might, push you to do more and more, but they're not doing it out of cruelty or narcissism or anything like that. They're doing it because They're trying to help you become a better scholar, and figuring out whether you have that or whether you have a toxic relationship with the advisor and getting out. But then also the other thing to think about in your relationship with your advisor or your mentors at this point in your career is not just what does my advisor or my mentor think about my work, but what do I think about what my advisor thinks about my work? So already separating you from your advisor, because you are not just replicating your advisor in the world. That is not your job. And when you go out, when you do the next stage, which is stepping into your own and getting out from under the wing, if you already think of yourself as separate from your advisor, then you will have a much better relationship going forward that could lead to future collaboration and continuing to work together without always being in this student-teacher dynamic, which has these power differences in it that is hard to kind of outlast, or it's hard to continue a relationship past the advisor relationship when those power dynamics are in place. One way to start thinking now as an apprentice, now in the learning stage, is not just caring about what your advisor thinks, caring about what you think about what your advisor thinks, right? You're innovating on what your advisor is teaching you because you are the next generation. So, of course, taking feedback and being a true apprentice, a true student, but also forming your own ideas as you go. All right, let's talk about time management strategies and time management in general during this apprenticeship stage. So what I see a lot from people in the apprenticeship stage of their academic careers is kind of like a full buy-in to the belief that I should be working 24/7. And this is a belief that I think is really perpetuated by the culture of academia. I am seeing this changing with like new generations, especially post-COVID, of young scholars or early scholars who are like, no, I can't, I'm not willing to sacrifice every hour of every day to the academic machine or whatever. So I do see this changing, but a lot of the time you are having to develop strategies for managing your time that incorporate reading, that incorporate thinking, that incorporate writing to a level that you haven't had to do before. For those of you in labs or doing field work, there's also that extra layer where, as my husband who was a animal science PhD at Michigan State, the cells don't sleep. You have to feed cells in the petri dish, like at the middle of the night, if that's what it requires. It's not something where you can necessarily fit your work into 9 to 5 as a student, or I should say under the supervision of an advisor, and also depending on your field. So because of that, I think there's a lot of binge and bust, like, oh, I'm going to binge write this paper. I'm going to stay up late and write the paper. I'm going to use my Saturdays and Sundays to write or to read. It's basically like, if you're a full-time doctoral student or a full-time postdoc, it does kind of take over your life, or it can, without some pretty strict guardrails in place from your advisor or in negotiation with your advisor. So the thing is, like, that's not all terrible. Like, many people have survived that during their apprenticeship stage. And I think that in order to change the culture of academia, we're going to have to stop this baptism by fire type of apprenticeship, where it's like, well, I went to the lab at midnight, so you have to too. Or I did this and I stayed up all night to write this thing to get it in on time. Or I worked all my nights and weekends. And you might have an advisor who still does that. So it's like, I've made these choices in my life, so there's no choice for you. I don't love that. I think that there should be more negotiation. And also, what I would say in terms of your energy and effort would be more usefully placed. I think that starting to think in kind of seasonality is also important in the apprenticeship stage. So, for example, if you're doing a research project or working in a lab or collecting data or doing something that involves you to being kind of, totally engrossed, it seeps into your life kind of 24/7, thinking of that as a season, but not thinking of that as the baseline way to live your academic life. Again, I'm trying to talk really generally across all fields, which isn't always easy to do. But I guess what I would like for you to do in your time management strategy stage, or for time management strategies at this stage, is keep a calendar. Start learning how to break projects down into tasks, learning how to marry your tasks to your calendar. Don't try to keep your calendar or your to-do list or your task list in your brain. Use an app, use paper, use something so that you have the many balls that are in the air already. You're starting to practice how you are project managing that. The reason is because you are going to need to get really good at time and project management as you go throughout your career. And right now in the apprenticeship stage, you might think, wow, I'm so busy. I'm taking all these classes, or I'm collecting my data and trying to write, or teaching and collecting data and writing, or whatever all you're doing. You think right now that it's a lot of things, and it is more things. Once you get out from the apprentice, once you move on to the next stage beyond being an apprentice, it only gets more complicated and the activities only get more disparate, so that task switching becomes, or topic switching becomes, a real impediment to your work. So it's time now to start really getting a calendar system, really getting a task management system in place. And this does not have to be fancy. In fact, I really want it to be something that works for you. So don't try to learn Notion. Don't try to learn ClickUp or like Monday or whatever is the hot app. Start with something really simple like a paper planner or a Google Calendar and a paper planner, and do what works for you until you run up against a barrier that would make an app more useful, that it makes sense to implement or learn a time management program or app. So I guess what I would say in general here is just, when you are in the apprenticeship stage, already starting to think about seasonality. So knowing that sometimes things that you do during your doctoral program or your postdoc, or honestly things that you do, like ways of handling your time, are not sustainable. And it's okay to do unsustainable things, especially in the apprenticeship stage, but have one eye looking out toward the future. Don't let yourself get socialized into the glorification of busy and the working 24/7 thing. That is will backfire later. So thinking instead of seasonality, like, okay, this is a season where I have to, do this certain kind of lab work, or I got to go in the field and do this, or I got to be in a library for 12 hours. Like, that's now, but it's not forever. And when this is your job and not you trying to get out of your doctoral program or through your postdoc, it really has to get more sustainable. And to the extent that you can, with your advisor, really talking about time management and not complaining, but talking through it, saying like, hey, how do you do this? Like, I'm finding I don't have enough hours to get the amount of reading done I need to be done. If you have, and I hope for you that you do, a relationship with your advisor where you can ask questions like that, that's a great question to ask, and just start to think like, okay, how am I going to start to build a time management system that works for me? So the last thing I want to talk about in relation to the apprenticeship stage is the relationship to research. Of course, in the apprenticeship stage, what you're doing is you're learning to be a researcher in your field. And so that learning involves a lot of replication, and it involves really understanding deeply what came before you so that you can build a future for yourself in your field. So of course you want to be innovative, but also the bulk of the work you do in research in this apprenticeship stage is apprenticeship. It's like understanding the values. It's understanding what science means or what analysis means or what theory making, knowledge making means in your field. And that means a lot of times really reading deeply so that you can build your academic future. So the relationship to research is usually, you might be worried about doing something new. You might be worried, is this good enough? And really your job in the apprenticeship stage is to be an apprentice. It's to learn enough of the history of your field, the background of your field, the pillars of the knowledge making in your field, learning the types of research that get done, what you like and what you don't like, where you see yourself wanting to spend time in your research career, and really building that foundational knowledge and apprenticing, like learning how to do it. And the dissertation, the purpose of the dissertation is to get your doctoral degree. So be clear, it is not necessarily to revolutionize the field. It is to get your doctoral degree. So what it does, the rhetorical purpose of the dissertation is to show your committee that you should be one of them. So it's not that you should show your committee that you are the smartest ever or anything like that. It is like literally show that you have done the work to understand the field enough and that you have prepared your skills as a researcher enough that now you can go and do this on your own. So that is the relationship to research at this stage. It is really a moment for apprenticeship. All right. Our next podcast episode in this series about real stages of the academic career is going to be about stepping into your own. That's creating your new thing, getting out from under the wing of the advisor. And I can't wait to talk to you all about that in our next episode of the podcast. Have a great day. Bye. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.